Dr. Zyron, a highly skilled alien doctor from the planet Xylar, had seen many strange creatures in his career. He was part of the Galactic Medical Research Team, responsible for studying different species found in the vast universe. Today, he stood in front of a glass chamber in his lab, staring at something his eyes had never seen before. A human. The human had been found floating unconscious in space by a passing alien ship. The crew had brought the human aboard, unsure if it was alive. Dr. Zyron, curious about this strange being, immediately took the human to his lab for research. He had heard of humans before. They were rumored to be weak and fragile, coming from a small planet called Earth. Other alien species considered humans insignificant, not worth worrying about. But as Dr. Zyron began running tests, he started to doubt everything he had heard. The human's body was unusual. Unlike any species he had studied, the human's cells repaired themselves at a rapid pace. Minor wounds healed within minutes, and even larger injuries showed signs of recovery far quicker than expected. Dr. Zyron rubbed his chin deep in thought. This is incredible, he muttered to himself. He watched the monitor as it displayed data from the human's body. Strong heartbeats, active brain waves, and an overall vitality that was surprising for a creature found floating in space. How could a species known to be so weak have such remarkable healing abilities? He turned to his assistant, a small insect-like alien named Zik. "This human is not normal," Dr. Zyron said, his voice filled with both curiosity and concern. "Look at the data. The human should be in worse condition after being exposed to the vacuum of space. But instead, it's recovering, faster than any creature I've ever seen." Zik glanced at the monitor, his many eyes blinking in surprise. "Should we inform the Galactic Council?" he asked cautiously. Dr. Zyron hesitated. The Galactic Council was always interested in new discoveries, especially if they involved unusual species. But something about this human made Dr. Zyron uneasy. If humans could heal this quickly, what else could they do? "No," Dr. Zyron finally said. "Not yet. We need to understand more before we involve the Council. Continue the tests." Hours passed, and the more Dr. Zyron studied, the more worried he became. The human's body wasn't just healing, it was adapting. The longer it stayed in the chamber, the more stable its vital signs became. It was as if the human's body was preparing for something, preparing to wake up. Suddenly, a soft beeping sound filled the room. Dr. Zyron looked at the screen, his eyes widening. The human's brain activity had spiked. Its body twitched slightly, fingers curling into a fist. The human was waking up. "Impossible!" Dr. Zyron gasped. "It's too soon?" Zik rushed over, his small legs clicking nervously. "What do we do, Doctor? Should we sedate it?" Dr. Zyron stared at the human, his heart racing. If this human was capable of waking up this quickly after floating in space, then it was far more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. What else could humans do if pushed to their limits? "No," Dr. Zyron whispered. "Let's observe. We need to see what happens." The human's eyes flickered open, revealing a sharp, focused gaze. Dr. Zyron took a step back, feeling an unfamiliar sense of fear creeping into his mind. This was no ordinary being. He could feel it. As the human looked around, taking in its surroundings, Dr. Zyron realized something terrifying. Everything the Galactic Council thought they knew about humans was wrong. This wasn't a weak, fragile species. This was something else. Something much more dangerous. And Dr. Zyron had just woken it up. Dr. Zyron couldn't take his eyes off the human. It was sitting up now, its movements slow and cautious, as if trying to understand where it was. The alien doctor felt a deep sense of unease. How could this human, found unconscious in the middle of space, recover so quickly? No other species he had studied had ever shown such resilience. Zik, Dr. Zyron's assistant, watched nervously from the corner of the room. "Doctor," Zik whispered, "are we sure it's safe to let this human stay awake?" Dr. Zyron didn't answer immediately. His mind was racing with questions. How could humans be so underestimated? He had always been taught that humans were weak and easily defeated in physical combat. But this human was different. The rapid healing, the stable vitals, and now, awake and aware. "We must observe it further," Dr. Zyron finally said, still staring at the human, who was now scanning the lab with calm, calculated eyes. "We need to understand what makes this human so special." The human looked at the glass walls around the chamber. For a brief moment, its eyes locked with Dr. Zyron's. The doctor felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something unsettling in those eyes, an intelligence, a sharpness he hadn't expected. Dr. Zyron turned to the monitors again, studying the data flowing in from the human's body. Everything was stabilizing at an astonishing rate, not just healing anymore, but improving. The human's heart rate was perfect, its brain activity strong, and its muscles were now showing signs of increased strength. "This doesn't make sense," Dr. Zyron muttered. "The human's body isn't just recovering, it's evolving." Zick blinked his large eyes in confusion. "Evolving? How is that possible, Doctor?" "It's as if the human's body is preparing for something," Dr. Zyron explained, his voice filled with a mix of fascination and dread. "It's adapting to its surroundings, like it's getting ready for a fight." Just then the human stood up. It moved slowly but with purpose. Dr. Zyron held his breath as he watched. The human wasn't scared, nor did it appear weak. Instead, it seemed completely in control, as though it knew exactly where it was and what it needed to do next. Zick took a nervous step back. "Doctor, should we activate the security systems? This human is starting to make me nervous." Dr. Zyron didn't respond. He was too busy watching the human's every move. The way it walked, the way it observed its surroundings. It was like watching a predator sizing up its prey. "Activate the scanners," Dr. Zyron finally ordered, his voice tense. "I want to know exactly what's happening inside its body." The scanners hummed to life, sending beams of light across the human's body. Dr. Zyron watched the results on the screen, his eyes widening with each passing second. The human's muscles were growing stronger by the minute, and its reflexes were now far faster than before. Brain activity had also increased, showing signs of heightened awareness. "This is impossible," Dr. Zyron whispered. "The human is growing more powerful right in front of us." The human suddenly stopped and looked up, its eyes locking on the security camera in the corner of the room. It knew it was being watched. Dr. Zyron's hands tightened around the edge of the control panel. "What are you?" he whispered under his breath, feeling the tension rise in the room. The human took a deep breath, then moved faster than Dr. Zyron expected. It reached for the glass wall, pressing its hand against it. The glass, designed to hold even the strongest of species, cracked slightly under the pressure. Zick jumped in shock. "Doctor, it's breaking through!" Dr. Zyron felt his heart race. This was no ordinary human. Whatever it was, it had powers far beyond anything he had ever seen. The human wasn't just dangerous, it was unstoppable. "We need to contain it," Dr. Zyron said, backing away from the console. "Before it's too late." But deep down, Dr. Zyron knew the truth. It might already be too late. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of machines and the cracking sound of the glass wall. Dr. Zyron stood frozen, his mind racing as he watched the human press its hand harder against the barrier. The crack spread like a spiderweb creeping across the glass. Zick, the assistant, trembled beside him, his many legs clattering nervously on the floor. "Doctor, we need to stop it!" Zick's voice was filled with panic. "If the human breaks through, we won't be able to contain it." Dr. Zyron didn't respond immediately. His eyes were locked on the human's face, which remained calm, determined, and focused. There was no sign of panic or fear. Instead, the human seemed almost controlled, like it knew exactly what it was doing. "Why aren't you afraid?" Dr. Zyron whispered to himself, his curiosity mixing with a growing sense of dread. The human pushed harder, and with a loud snap, the glass wall shattered. Pieces of the high-tech barrier scattered across the floor as the human stepped forward, completely unharmed. Dr. Zyron felt a cold sweat on his skin. How could something so fragile-looking be this powerful? "Security!" Dr. Zyron yelled into the intercom. "We need full lockdown now." Red lights flashed across the lab as alarms blared. Metal doors began to slide shut, aiming to trap the human inside. But the human moved swiftly, faster than any creature Dr. Zyron had ever seen. Before the doors could close completely, the human slipped through the gap with ease. "Impossible," Dr. Zyron gasped, watching the monitor as the human made its way into the main corridor. "How can it be so fast?" Zick's many eyes darted nervously between the monitors. "Doctor, what do we do? The human is escaping! It will be free soon!" Dr. Zyron's heart pounded in his chest. He had never expected this. All the data, all the research had pointed to humans being weak. But now this human was showing abilities beyond his wildest fears. Strength, speed, and intelligence. It was all wrapped in a creature no one had considered dangerous. "We must stop it," Dr. Zyron said, his voice tight. "If this human escapes, the entire facility is at risk." Meanwhile, in the corridor, the human moved with precision. It studied the surroundings, scanning for exits and calculating its next move. There was no hesitation in its steps, no fear of the alarms or the alien creatures scrambling to contain it. Suddenly, 2 armed guards appeared at the end of the hallway, their weapons drawn. They aimed at the human, their fingers hovering over the triggers. "Stop right there!" one of the guards shouted in an alien language. The human didn't flinch. It calmly observed the situation, eyes sharp and calculating. The guards exchanged nervous glances, unsure what to expect. They had been briefed that humans were fragile, easily defeated, but this one seemed different. "Open fire!" the lead guard ordered. Blasts of energy shot through the air, but the human moved with incredible speed, dodging the attacks effortlessly. In a blur of motion, the human charged forward, disarming one of the guards with a swift, precise strike. The second guard barely had time to react before the human knocked him out cold with a single blow. Dr. Zyron watched in disbelief on the monitor. "This can't be real," he whispered, his hands trembling. "How is a human capable of this?" Zik turned to him, fear in his eyes. "Doctor, this human is not what we thought. It's something else, something far more dangerous." Dr. Zyron knew Zik was right. Every assumption they had made about humans had been shattered in a matter of minutes. This wasn't just a specimen. They had awakened something far more powerful than they had imagined. As the human moved further into the facility, breaking through every obstacle in its path, Dr. Zyron realized with a sinking feeling that they had unleashed a force they couldn't control, and now nothing could stop it. Dr. Zyron stood frozen, watching the chaos unfold on the monitor. The human was moving fast, leaving a trail of confusion and fear behind it. Each guard that tried to stop it was swiftly defeated, their weapons useless against the incredible strength and speed of this creature. Panic filled the air as alarms blared, and the facility went into lockdown. "Doctor, we must act now," Zik urged, his multiple eyes wide with fear. "If we don't contain the human, it will escape, and who knows what will happen." Dr. Zyron nodded, shaking off his shock. "You're right. We need to inform the command center and request reinforcements. This human is not just a specimen anymore, it's a threat." He activated the communication system, his fingers trembling as he spoke. "This is Dr. Zyron. We have an emergency. A human specimen has escaped containment and is currently on the loose in the facility. We require immediate assistance." As he spoke, the screen showed the human darting down a long hallway. It moved like a shadow, quick and silent, as it dodged the frantic guards trying to catch it. Dr. Zyron felt a mix of fear and admiration. The human was a skilled fighter, unlike anything he had ever witnessed. "Doctor, look!" Zik shouted, pointing to the monitor. The human had reached a large room filled with advanced equipment and tools. Without hesitation, it scanned the area, assessing its surroundings. Then, to Dr. Zyron's astonishment, the human began to gather supplies. It picked up a metal rod, weighing it in its hands like a weapon, and then located a nearby panel of controls. "What is it doing?" Zik wondered aloud, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Dr. Zyron replied, his mind racing. "But whatever it is, it must be planning to defend itself." The human activated the control panel, and suddenly, the entire facility began to tremble. A siren echoed through the halls, signaling an incoming threat. The human had hacked into the facility's systems, causing confusion among the security personnel. "Doctor, we must go," Zik urged, inching back nervously. "If the human can do this, it could override everything." Just then, the lights flickered, and a flood of alarms erupted. Security teams were mobilizing, and chaos filled the facility. The human was no longer just a being to study. It had become a formidable force, taking control of the very systems designed to contain it. Dr. Zyron clenched his fists, trying to think clearly. "We need to form a strategy," he said, glancing at Zik. "We can't just send more guards in blindly. We need a plan." Zik nodded, his many legs moving restlessly. "Perhaps we can use the facility's cameras to track its movements. We need to corner it and—" Before he could finish, the human appeared on the screen again. It had made its way to the armory where weapons were stored. The sight sent chills down Dr. Zyron's spine. This was not good. If the human got its hands on those weapons, it would be unstoppable. "Activate the lockdown protocols in the armory," Dr. Zyron shouted into the intercom, his voice urgent. "Seal it off before it gets armed!" But the human was too quick. Just as the lockdown initiated, the human slammed the metal rod against the door control panel. Sparks flew, and the door flew open, granting access to the weapons inside. "No!" Dr. Zyron yelled, watching helplessly as the human stepped into the armory, emerging with an array of weapons, energy blasters, protective gear, and even explosives. With each passing moment, Dr. Zyron felt the weight of his decisions. He had underestimated this human, believing it to be a simple specimen. Now it was clear that they were facing a being capable of great destruction. "Gather all available forces," Dr. Zyron ordered. "We must act quickly. We need to trap it before it can do any more damage." As the alarm continued to ring, Dr. Zyron and Zik hurried to the command center. They would need all the help they could get to stop this human. The hunt was on, and it was a race against time. Dr. Zyron felt the tension in the air. They were no longer just observing. They were now part of a deadly game, and the human was the hunter. The chase had begun, and Dr. Zyron couldn't shake the feeling that they had awakened something far more dangerous than they ever anticipated. This is part 4 of the story, focusing on the escalating tension as the human becomes a serious threat. The pacing is quick, and the use of simple, basic English keeps the audience engaged while highlighting the perilous situation. Dr. Zyron raced through the dimly lit corridors of the facility, his heart pounding in his chest. Alarms blared, echoing off the walls, and the air was thick with tension. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The human was armed and on the loose, and time was running out. "Doctor, we need to hurry!" Zik scuttled alongside him, his many legs moving quickly. "If the human gets to the main control room, it could shut down the entire facility." "I know," Dr. Zyron replied, his voice tense. "We must reach the command center and secure our defenses. We need to prepare for a confrontation." As they approached the command center, Dr. Zyron could hear voices inside. Security personnel were discussing their next moves, trying to formulate a plan to stop the human. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, taking a deep breath to steady himself. "Everyone listen," Dr. Zyron called out, his voice commanding attention. "The human is armed and extremely dangerous. We cannot underestimate its abilities. We must work together if we are to contain it." The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to him. The guards, a mix of nervous and determined expressions, nodded in agreement. Dr. Zyron could see the fear in their eyes, but he also saw a flicker of resolve. They knew what was at stake. "Have we tracked its location?" Dr. Zyron asked, turning to a technician at the console. "Yes, doctor," the technician replied, glancing at the screen. "It's moving toward the main reactor room. If it reaches there, it could cause a meltdown." Dr. Zyron's stomach dropped. "We must stop it before it's too late. We can't allow the human to gain access to that area." He quickly organized a team of guards, assigning them to different sections of the facility to block the human's path. They moved with urgency, adrenaline coursing through their veins as they prepared for the impending confrontation. As Dr. Zyron and Zik led the charge toward the reactor room, they heard the distant sounds of chaos. The human was fighting its way through guards, displaying unmatched strength and agility. Each blast of energy and clattering of weapons echoed through the halls like a warning. "Doctor, what if we can't stop it?" Zik asked, fear creeping into his voice. Dr. Zyron clenched his fists, determination fueling him. "We have to believe we can. We must contain this human before it unleashes a disaster. It's now or never." They finally reached the reactor room door, which was heavily reinforced. Dr. Zyron could hear the sounds of fighting inside. He turned to his team, their faces set with determination. "Remember, this is not just a specimen, it's a threat to our entire facility. We must be cautious but ready to engage." With a deep breath, he activated the door control. The door slid open, revealing the chaotic scene inside. The human was surrounded by several guards, all attempting to subdue it. But the human moved like a whirlwind, striking with precision and avoiding their attacks. "Now!" Dr. Zyron shouted, and his team rushed in, weapons drawn. The room erupted into chaos. Blasts of energy filled the air, and the human swiftly dodged, countering with incredible skill. It swung the metal rod, knocking one guard to the ground, while another was thrown back by a powerful kick. "Stop!" Dr. Zyron yelled, raising his hands in an attempt to get the human's attention. "We do not want to harm you. We only want to understand." The human paused, turning its gaze toward Dr. Zyron. For a moment, the chaos slowed and both sides took a breath. The human's eyes were intense, filled with a mix of confusion and determination. "Why do you capture us?" the human said, its voice steady. "We are not your enemy. But if you push us, we will fight."